I built our family business to $30 million, but at Dad's party my sister claimed all the credit, so I took everything back overnight. Hi guys. So, I never thought I'd be the type to air family drama, but here I am. Let's just say the last few years have been eye-opening. Let me lay this out for you. My name's Lauren Shaw, and for a decade, I poured everything into my family's woodworking business. What started as a tiny repair shop became a $30 million bespoke furniture company under my leadership. Sounds like a success story, right? Yeah, I thought so too, until things took a hard turn. Our family business was Dad's pride and joy. It started as a small woodworking shop my dad, Jack Shaw, opened 18 years ago in a tiny rental space on Main Street. At first, it was just him making custom furniture for people in town. Kitchen tables, chairs, cabinets, stuff like that. He was great at what he did, but he never really made a lot of money. It kept the lights on and put food on the table, but that's about it. My older sister Morgan and I grew up with the shop being this constant part of our lives. Morgan, though, was always Dad's favorite. She was the classic overachiever. Ivy League business school, internships at fancy companies, the whole package. I was the practical kid. I stayed local, went to a community college for graphic design, and helped Dad at the shop after classes. I guess you could say I didn't stand out, not compared to Morgan anyway. And actually, I didn't mind. I'm not the type who seeks attention, but I loved that shop. I loved seeing raw materials turn into something beautiful. I liked working with customers and figuring out how to make their ideas come to life. Dad didn't always listen to my ideas, but he trusted me to handle the day-to-day stuff while he worked on projects. Meanwhile, Morgan was off in another state, working as a consultant for some big-name firm. She only visited on holidays, and even then, she'd make comments about how I was wasting my potential. "You could be doing so much more than working here, Lauren," she'd say, like I didn't already know that. Around my senior year of college, I started thinking about how we could modernize the business. The custom furniture was great, but it wasn't scalable. We couldn't grow with just Dad handcrafting every piece. So, I taught myself three-dimensional design software and came up with a line of customizable furniture. Customers could choose the base design and tweak the size, color, and finish. It was a way to keep the personal touch but streamline production. I pitched the idea to Dad, and he wasn't exactly thrilled. He'd been doing things his way for decades and didn't see the need to change. But I worked on a prototype anyway and showed it to one of our loyal customers, a local boutique owner. She placed an order on the spot for 10 pieces. When Dad saw the check come in, he finally said, "Maybe you're onto something, kiddo." That one order turned into more orders, and soon we had a steady stream of clients. I graduated college and went all in. I redesigned the workshop, hired a couple of local guys to help with production, and got us set up on social media. It was a grind. I'd work 12 to 14-hour days, 6 or 7 days a week. Meanwhile, Morgan was in Chicago, living her best life. Fancy job, fancy apartment, fancy vacations. She didn't have much to say about the shop back then. I guess it wasn't interesting enough for her. By the third year, we hit $2 million in revenue. We'd gone from a small-town woodworking shop to a recognizable name in custom furniture. I'd landed contracts with boutique hotels and a few interior designers, which opened up a whole new market for us. Over the years, that steady growth transformed Shaw Designs into a $30 million business, something I never thought possible when we first started. The business was doing better than ever, and for the first time, Dad seemed genuinely proud of me. He'd always been hard to impress, so hearing him tell his friends, "Lauren's the reason this shop is still standing," meant a lot. But that's when Morgan decided she wanted in. She called one night, suddenly, and said she was thinking of leaving her job in Chicago. She talked about how she'd always wanted to come back and work in the family business. That was news to me because she'd never shown the slightest interest before. But Dad? Oh, he thought it was the best idea ever. "Both my girls running the company together? That's a dream come true," he said. I didn't want to burst his bubble, so I kept my reservations to myself. When Morgan officially moved back, Dad didn't just bring her on as part of the team, he made her co-CEO. Just like that. She didn't know anything about woodworking, design, or even how the business ran, but she had a fancy MBA, so I guess that was enough for Dad. "She's got the business smarts," he said. "You've got the creative side. You'll balance each other out." At first, I tried to make it work. I stayed focused on the design and production side, while Morgan handled marketing and PR. She honestly had some good ideas, like getting us into trade shows and setting up partnerships with influencers. But she also had a habit of making decisions without consulting me. She'd commit to things we didn't have the capacity for or promise deadlines we couldn't meet. It drove me crazy, but Dad always took her side. "She's just trying to grow the business," he'd say, like I wasn't. At the time, I kept telling myself that as long as the business was thriving, it didn't matter who got the credit. But over time, it became clear that Morgan wasn't just back to help. She was back to take over. Things didn't just change, they cracked wide open. The business wasn't one cohesive thing anymore. It felt like two separate entities awkwardly jammed together, and guess who kept getting sidelined? Yeah, me. Morgan wasn't just trying to contribute, she was on a mission to take over. She started by bringing in a marketing team, as if my years of running social media and client outreach didn't count. Sure, I wasn't a marketing guru, but I had built real relationships with our customers, relationships that turned into contracts and loyalty. But Morgan? She looked at me like I was some clueless intern. "We need professionals, Lauren," she said, like that was the magic answer to everything. I bit my tongue and let her bring in her team, hoping it might ease my workload. Her team didn't get us. Our business thrived on authenticity, personal touches, custom designs, real connections. But they came in with cookie-cutter strategies, plastering our brand across generic, flashy ads. One day, I saw an Instagram post from our account that said, "Luxury furniture for every lifestyle." I almost spit out my coffee. Every lifestyle? We were all about high-end, custom pieces that people invested in, not some generic department store furniture. When I brought it up, Morgan dismissed me like I was overreacting. "This is how you scale, Lauren. Broader audience, bigger growth," she said with that fake patient tone she loved. "Scaling's great and all, but not when it means throwing away the customers who actually got us here." Morgan either didn't get it or didn't care. Her obsession with bigger and better didn't stop there. For years, we ran the business out of a workshop attached to the storefront. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Morgan hated it. "We need a bigger space," she declared one day, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I pointed out that we couldn't even fill half the space we were in. She didn't care. "Big clients want big businesses, Lauren," she said, like she was reading off a Pinterest quote board. Dad backed her up, of course, and before I knew it, we had a 5-year lease on a massive warehouse. It was all about image, glass-walled offices, a fancy showroom, the whole 9 yards. Sure, it looked impressive, but it was a logistical disaster. Orders got delayed because the team couldn't figure out the new layout, and production time slowed to a crawl. Meanwhile, I was spending late nights trying to fix the chaos while Morgan gave tours to investors, soaking up the credit for a space she didn't even know how to run. But the worst part? She started stepping on my toes with my team. The designers and craftsmen who had been with us for years knew how to get things done, and they trusted me to lead. Morgan didn't like that. She started bypassing me, giving them assignments directly. One day, one of my designers came to me saying, "Morgan just gave me this project." He held up a sketch. "She said you approved it." I hadn't even seen it. When I confronted her, she barely looked up from her laptop. "It's called delegation, Lauren. You should try it sometime," she said with this smug little grin, like she hadn't just derailed my entire workflow. And then there were the meetings, endless meetings that I wasn't invited to. Vendors, clients, potential partners. Morgan handled them all, and I'd only hear about it after the fact. One time I showed up to work and found out she'd pitched a furniture line to a retailer without even telling me. The designs weren't even ready for production. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. She waved it off. "It wasn't a big deal," she said, as if presenting unfinished work to a major client was a totally normal thing to do. Her power plays only got bolder. She brought in some strategic advisor named Eric, a guy who talked like a walking TED Talk. Synergy, streamlining, scaling. You name the buzzword. He used it. His big idea? "Outsourcing production overseas. You'll save a fortune," he said, pointing at some fancy chart. I couldn't believe it. "We built this business on quality and customization," I said. "If we start mass-producing furniture, we lose everything that makes us unique." Morgan didn't like it. "Lauren, you're being dramatic. This is how companies grow." It wasn't about growth, it was about control. Morgan wasn't trying to make the business better. She wanted to mold it into her own vision, no matter what it cost. The final blow came during a meeting with a potential partner. Morgan introduced herself as the visionary behind the company, taking credit for initiatives I had created from scratch. She didn't even flinch as she rewrote history in front of everyone. Afterward, I couldn't hold back. "Don't ever take credit for my work again," I told her simply and clearly. She shrugged, like it was nothing. "It's not about you, Lauren, it's about the company." But it wasn't. It was about her. By then I barely recognized the business I had poured my heart into, the clients I'd nurtured, the team I'd led, the culture we'd built. It all felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And Dad? He didn't care. As long as the numbers looked good, he was happy to stay out of it. And just as I was struggling to keep up with all the changes, the day arrived that upended everything. My dad's 58th birthday. By the time the party came around, I was completely burned out and barely holding it together. Morgan had taken over so much that I felt like a stranger in the company I'd built. Walking away crossed my mind more than once, but deep down, I knew I couldn't let go. Not after everything I had sacrificed to get us here. Morgan had taken the lead on planning the party, and it was clear from the start that her focus wasn't on celebrating Dad, it was on showcasing herself. She made every decision without consulting anyone. I debated skipping it altogether, but Mom insisted I come, saying, "It's your father's big day, Lauren." So reluctantly, I agreed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that this night would be anything but simple. Dad's birthday party was supposed to be a celebration of him, a way to honor everything he'd built, both with the family and the business. Instead, it became something else entirely. The moment I walked into the banquet hall Morgan had rented, I knew this wasn't going to be your typical family gathering. The place was over the top, crisp white linens, a dessert table that looked like it belonged in a magazine. It didn't scream Dad at all. Dad was the kind of guy who liked backyard barbecues and a cold soda with friends, but Morgan had transformed this into something corporate. She'd invited a mix of people, family, old friends, business associates, and some investors. Half the people in the room didn't even know Dad outside of his title as the founder of Shaw Designs. It was more of a networking event than a birthday celebration. But that was Morgan's style. Everything had to serve a purpose. I got there early, hoping to make myself useful. Morgan was already darting around, orchestrating every detail. When I tried to pitch in, she waved me off like I was in the way. Fine. I resigned myself to greeting guests as they arrived, and catching up with a couple of Dad's buddies. Dinner started without much fanfare. The food was great, and for a little while, I let myself relax. I figured, maybe, just maybe, we'd get through the night without any drama. Then Morgan stood up and walked to the front of the room. She tapped a glass, and the conversations around the room trailed off. I expected her to give a toast about Dad, maybe a funny story from when we were kids, something personal. But as soon as she started talking, I realized this wasn't about Dad at all. She opened with a few words about Dad's hard work and his contributions to the company. I nodded along, waiting for her to wrap up and hand the moment back to him. Instead, she shifted gears. She started talking about Shaw Designs' bright future and the steps needed to ensure sustainable growth. I froze. This was starting to sound more like a press release than a birthday speech. I glanced around the room, and I wasn't the only one confused. "As we celebrate this amazing milestone for Dad," she said, her voice dripping with confidence, "it's also the perfect time to share some exciting changes for Shaw Designs." Then she turned, locking eyes with me. "After consulting with key advisors, we've decided the company needs a unified vision to move forward. So, effective immediately, I'll be stepping in as sole CEO." She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared right at me like she was daring me to say something. She wasn't just talking about taking over the company, she was doing it in front of everyone, family, clients, investors, making it clear that there was no room for debate. This wasn't a discussion, this was a declaration. Everyone in the room started to clap while I sat there, completely frozen, as Morgan turned what should have been a corporate update into a full-on character assassination. "Some people in the company, though," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "are better suited to technical roles rather than leadership." Then, with a calculated pause, she addressed me directly, saying, "My sister, Lauren, who has been dedicated to the creative side of the business." She talked about how grateful she was for my support, but she added, "To compete in today's market, we need vision. We need excellence, and frankly, Lauren, you're just not cut out for this level of business." I stared at her, trying to process what this nonsense was. I glanced at Dad, desperate for him to step in, to say something, anything. But no, he just nodded along, smiling like Morgan had just delivered the speech of the year. Mom didn't look up, her hands trembling as she stared at her plate. Morgan wasn't done though. "The truth is," she continued, her voice getting louder, more assertive, "you're worthless in today's business world, Lauren. Your old-fashioned ideas and lack of proper business education have become a liability. It's time for you to step aside gracefully." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Every pair of eyes turned to me, waiting for some kind of response. I could feel the pity, the judgment, the whispers forming before I even moved. Everything I'd worked for, every late night, every sacrifice, was being stripped away in front of people I knew, people I had respected. All eyes were on me, probably expecting me to break down or start yelling, but I wasn't giving them that satisfaction. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. I grabbed my purse, walked over to Dad's table, and placed the small, wrapped gift I'd brought in front of him. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, my voice calm and steady. Without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked out, keeping my head high as the whispers and stares followed me all the way out the door. The drive home was a blur. My mind was racing, replaying the events of the night over and over. I kept thinking about all the late nights I'd spent at the shop, the contracts I'd landed, the relationships I'd built with our clients. And now Morgan was kicking me out of all of it. By the time I got home, my shock had burned away, leaving something sharper and colder in its place. This wasn't just about Morgan trying to take over, it was how she went about it. Calculated, deliberate, and in front of a room full of people who had no idea what was actually happening. She didn't just sideline me, she tried to erase me. That was not going to happen. I stayed up all night. My desk was a mess of papers, files, and documents, but it wasn't chaos, it was strategy. Every piece of paper, line of text, every forgotten detail I pulled from years of work felt like another tool in my arsenal. This wasn't just a reaction, it was preparation. I didn't sleep. By sunrise, I had something concrete, something I knew I could work with. Morgan wanted a show? I could play that game, but I wasn't going to let her script it this time. I'd be the one setting the stage. The next morning, I was in the office before the building even fully woke up. I wasn't just early, I was ready. I had everything I needed lined up, both in my head and on paper. Morgan arrived around 9 o'clock in the morning, her usual confident stride on full display. Dad trailed behind her, carrying a bag stuffed with leftover decorations from the party. They looked like two people who thought they'd already won. "What are you doing here so early?" Morgan asked, tossing her bag onto the conference table like she owned the place. "After last night, I thought you'd have the dignity to stay home." I leaned back in my chair, calm and steady. "Just tying up some loose ends," I said, letting the words hang there. I didn't waste any time. I pulled out my iPad, tapped it awake, and slid it across the table. "Let's talk about the future of Shaw Designs," I said, connecting it to the conference room screen. The ownership agreement from 3 years ago popped up, crystal clear for everyone to see. Morgan barely even looked at it, leaning back in her chair like she already had this whole thing wrapped up. Dad wasn't much better. He crossed his arms and said, "There's nothing to talk about. Morgan's the one in charge now." I raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Yeah, okay, let's talk about that then," I said, scrolling to the key section and zooming in for emphasis. "Remember when we needed funding for the warehouse expansion, Dad? You sold me an additional 13 1/3% of the company. That brings my total ownership to 53%. I'm the majority shareholder now." I turned to Morgan, my voice steady and unwavering. "You might have made a nice speech last night, but you don't have the authority to make leadership changes without my approval, and I didn't approve it." Morgan stopped mid-scribble and finally looked up. "That's not possible," she said. "It's not only possible, it's a fact," I shot back, flipping to the next page of the agreement. "Here's your signature, Dad. You were in such a hurry to get the deal done that you didn't even bother to negotiate." Dad interrupted. "I didn't think you'd use it against your own family." "Against my family?" I repeated. Funny, I don't remember being consulted before someone decided to announce a leadership change at a party in front of half our clients. Morgan leaned forward, clearly trying to regain control. Lauren, be realistic. This isn't about shares or paperwork. The company needs someone with vision, someone who can lead. You're great at creative stuff, but running a business? That's not your strength. I smiled, pulling up the next file. You're right, Morgan. Leadership is about vision. So let's talk about what's actually holding this company together. The core designs that generate 80% of our revenue? They're owned by my separate company, Artisan Concepts. Shaw Designs only has a licensing agreement to use them. That agreement expired this morning. Morgan's head snapped toward the screen, her eyes darting over the licensing terms. You've got to be kidding me, she said, her voice sharp. I'm not, I replied. Without those designs, Shaw Designs has nothing to sell, and I've decided not to renew the agreement. Effective immediately, those designs are no longer available to this company. Dad slammed his hand on the table. You can't do that. You'd be destroying everything we've built. I didn't flinch. No, Dad, I'm protecting what I built. While Morgan was busy making speeches and hiring PR teams, I was the one keeping this company running. The clients, the production, the designs. That was all me, and you both thought you could just erase me. Morgan stood up, pacing like she was trying to find some way out of this. This is ridiculous, Lauren. You're sabotaging your own company just to prove a point. Oh wait, it gets better, I said, flipping to another document. Last night I emailed all our major clients to inform them of the leadership changes and my departure. You remember those contracts I negotiated? Most of them include clauses allowing clients to terminate their agreements if I'm no longer involved. Want to see how many have already triggered those clauses? I pulled up the email responses on the screen. One by one, client names appeared, each one confirming their decision to terminate their contract with Shaw Designs. That's just the start, I said, scrolling through the list. By the end of today, most of our revenue streams will be gone. The room fell silent. Through the glass walls, we could see employees gathering in small groups, their whispers growing louder as they checked their emails. One by one, phones lit up, laptops opened, and heads turned toward the conference room. Morgan's composure cracked. She grabbed her phone and started scrolling, her movements frantic. You can't do this, she said, her voice uneven. You're destroying the company. The company? I said. The company you tried to steal from me? The one you thought you could just take over because you have an MBA and Dad's approval? Her phone fell to the table with a clatter. That company, I continued, standing up and smoothing my blazer, ceases to exist the moment you decided to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. I paused, letting the silence settle over the room. So, here are your options. Option 1. I walk away with my shares, my designs, my clients, and my employees. Shaw Designs becomes an empty shell, and you get to explain to all those important people you invited last night why the company's value dropped to zero overnight. Morgan started to protest, but I cut her off. Or we can go with option 2. I walk away entirely, taking my designs, my team, and my clients with me. Shaw Designs becomes nothing more than an empty name. Your choice. The room was tense as they realized I wasn't bluffing. Dad finally sat down, looking defeated. You're serious about this, he said quietly. As serious as Morgan was when she announced she was taking over, I replied. Dad looked at me, then at Morgan, and finally spoke. Morgan, you need to step down. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew it was over. Slowly she nodded, pulling out a pen to sign the resignation documents. The rest of the meeting was a blur of paperwork and formalities. Morgan signed the resignation documents, and just like that, her reign as co-CEO was over. By noon, I was sitting alone in my office, staring at the company I'd fought so hard to protect. It was mine again, but it didn't feel like a victory. The damage to my family was done, and I wasn't sure if we'd ever recover. Mom came by later that evening, her expression heavy with disappointment. Did it have to come to this? She asked. I told her they didn't leave me a choice. The next morning, I got to work rebuilding. This was now my company, and no one was going to take it from me again. The dust settled, but the aftermath hit like an aftershock. By the time Morgan had packed her things and left, the office was buzzing with rumors. Employees who had loyally followed her lead just days before were now scrambling to adjust. Some didn't know if their jobs were safe, others weren't sure who to answer to anymore. The divide she had created during her brief reign lingered like an open wound. The first few weeks after the shakeup were absolute chaos. I spent every waking moment putting out fires. Clients who'd cut ties because of Morgan's leadership change had to be reassured that the company was back in the right hands. Contracts that were in limbo needed renegotiation. I had my work cut out for me, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control again. Morgan, on the other hand, didn't go quietly. A week after she left, whispers started circulating that she was telling people I'd sabotaged her. She painted herself as the victim, claiming I'd gone behind her back and ruined what could have been a transformative era for Shaw Designs. It was absurd, but she was persistent. Some of her friends in the industry started calling me the dictator, accusing me of hoarding power and refusing to share the spotlight. At first, I ignored it. The work spoke for itself. The clients who returned after her departure weren't coming back out of pity. They were coming back because they trusted me. But when one of our vendors hesitated to renew their contract, citing instability in leadership, I knew I had to address it. So, I called a company-wide meeting. Everyone, from the warehouse crew to the design team, sat in the conference room while I laid it all out. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told them exactly what had happened, how Morgan's decisions had jeopardized the company, and what I was doing to fix it. "This isn't just about me," I said. "This is about preserving what we've built together, and I need every single one of you to be part of that." By the end of the meeting, the room was silent, but the atmosphere had shifted. People started coming up to me afterward, offering their support. The trust Morgan had tried to erode was slowly rebuilding itself. After 2 months from that incident, Dad decided to retire. I think he finally understood that his golden child had nearly destroyed his legacy. He didn't make a big deal out of it. No party, no announcement. One day, he just stopped coming to the office. I think part of him felt embarrassed about how everything had played out. He'd thrown his support behind Morgan, only to watch her nearly dismantle the business. We didn't talk much in those first few months. The few times we did, the conversations were short and strained. Mom, as always, tried to play peacemaker. "You know your father didn't mean for any of this to happen," she told me one night over dinner. He's proud of both of you in different ways. He thought he was doing the right thing." I didn't have the energy to argue. I just nodded and let her talk. Morgan, on the other hand, didn't stay quiet. In less than a month, she had a new job lined up at a startup in California. She started posting on LinkedIn about new beginnings, and how her time at Shaw Designs had taught her invaluable lessons. The posts didn't mention me, but the subtext was clear. At that time, I didn't cut her off but kept my distance. As for my family, we still met during the holidays, but these were the worst. Christmas this year was the breaking point for me. I knew it was going to be tense, but somehow, it still managed to outdo my lowest expectations. Morgan and I had been at odds for months, and this was the first time we'd been in the same room since everything went down with the company. I should have just skipped it, but for Mom's sake, I decided to show up. Morgan, of course, arrived late, waltzing in like she was some kind of celebrity. She gave Mom one of those quick fake hugs that are all for show and completely ignored me. Instead, she made a beeline for Dad, who was already grinning like she was the greatest thing to ever walk through the door. They spent most of the morning huddled together in the corner, whispering and laughing, while I helped Mom finish setting up the table. I wasn't bitter, okay, maybe a little, but I kept my mouth shut. Mom was stressed enough without me adding to it, and honestly, I wasn't in the mood for a showdown. I just wanted to get through dinner and go home. Dinner itself was about as uncomfortable as you'd expect. Morgan didn't even try to talk to me, focusing all her energy on charming Dad. She was going on about some big consulting opportunity, and how she was gearing up for her next big move. Classic Morgan. Mom, bless her heart, kept trying to include me in the conversation. "So Lauren," Mom said, clearly trying to shift the focus, "how's the company doing?" "It's been a good year," I said, keeping it short. I wasn't about to give Morgan any ammo, but of course, she couldn't let it go. "A good year?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Or just a lucky one?" Her tone was so condescending, it made my skin crawl. Mom shot me a look, like she was silently begging me not to respond, and Dad just kept eating, like he didn't hear a thing. I could have snapped back, but what was the point? Morgan thrived on getting a reaction, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. So, I ignored her, focusing on my plate and pretending she didn't exist. After dinner, I thought I was in the clear. Morgan was busy with Dad, and I figured I could slip out without any drama. But she cornered me in the living room, her tone low enough that no one else could hear. "You must be so proud of yourself," she started, her words dripping with sarcasm. "You've got the company now. You're finally the star. But don't think for a second this is going to last, Lauren. You're going to screw it up eventually." I stared at her, trying to keep my face blank. Inside, I was fuming, but I wasn't about to give her the fight she was looking for. "If that's all, Morgan, I'd like to get back to what's left of the holiday," I said, my voice calm and steady. She let out this bitter little laugh. "Always playing the victim," she muttered before walking away. The rest of the night was a mess. Dad disappeared into his study, like he always does when things get uncomfortable, and Mom tried so hard to keep the holiday spirit alive, but even she looked drained. The tension was unbearable, and by the time Morgan left, I felt like I'd run a marathon just from keeping my cool. That night, I kept thinking about all the fights, the bitterness, the constant power struggles. Morgan had turned what was supposed to be a family business into a war zone, and no matter what I did, it was never going to change. I couldn't fix this. I didn't even want to anymore. The next morning, I made my decision. I was done. No more pretending. No more holding on to hope that we could go back to how things used to be. Morgan had made it clear that there was no relationship left to salvage. And honestly, I can't be with her in the same room ever again. I blocked her number and cut her out of my life, and you know what? It was freeing. Without Morgan in my life, I could finally focus on what mattered. The company was thriving under my leadership, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that was truly mine. The flashy, hollow marketing campaigns were gone, replaced with a more authentic approach that resonated with our clients. My team was thriving too. Designers who'd been hesitant to speak up under Morgan's reign were pitching bold new ideas, and production was running smoother than ever. But what I truly learned from all of this is that sometimes family can be your worst enemy, especially in business. Thank you guys for reading.